think where suites go wrong is to say, like, look, I'm number one expanding with solutions that are pretty mediocre, and so I just buy random things and put them together. Two, I sell shelfware where I just try to push as much product to a customer as possible. And three, I don't really have the measurements in place to understand the adoption of our solutions and the value that they provide. Some customers, you need to spend much more time with them to define their agents and then launch them. Other customers who already use your product for certain cases, they already start using, agents out of the box directly. And so the pattern of consumption is different. And what we chose to do is we basically decided to test it because we are kind of a testing company. So we thought we should test it. So we gave customers credits to consume and see what patterns emerge in terms of how companies actually start using our solution. Because ultimately, as I said before, our pricing strategy is all about adoption. Because for me, I did not want to make price the issue of why somebody wouldn't adopt our AI. I want, us to first learn how people use the solution. And then, once we identified some of the patterns, then we can talk to a customer about, like, look, this is how many credits you consume for the following tasks. You're doing these many tasks. This is kind of like how many credits you will need for the full year. And this is the cost for them. And this is the value that you deliver. That's the conversation you then get in. I think every technology company today, if you run a technology company, and I do this for Optimizely, I tell my team, we need to be very clear about where we play and where we don't play and where we connect with somebody else. Because just with software, it's the same thing. Yeah. The only thing is AI companies are now so much easier to start even than before software companies. So in some ways you find so many more. And so the noise ratio is so much louder. And this is why I think it's so important that you are able to articulate where to start and where your swim lanes are. And then obviously you need to be able to articulate to people about, how to actually see the differentiation in tools relative to the data, the instruction, the toolings, that the context that every solution has.
Welcome. This is Second Acts, a podcast where we document how SaaS leaders chart the exacting foundational shifts of scaling up. And I'm your host, Krish Subramanian, co-founder and CEO at ChargeBee. This season, we are diving into AI's all-out enterprise embrace and how that's accelerating second acts everywhere, reshaping software categories, business models, and reorganizing teams to meet never-before-seen stakes. Now, on to the episode. This episode's guest, Alex Atzberger, spent nearly 15 years at SAP holding several leadership roles, including President of SAP Customer Experience, SAP Ariba, and Chief of Staff to the Office of the CEO. In 2013, he was named a Young Global Leader by the World Economic Forum. In his most recent role as CEO of Optimizely, Alex has scaled the company from 100 million to over 400 million in ARR in just 4 years, turning it into an AI-powered suite of suites for end-to-end digital experiences. That journey has featured a series of acquisitions, a deliberate, almost architectural approach to scaling a platform, and a clear-eyed understanding of pricing strategy and operating discipline. As passionate as Alex is about enterprise software, he also runs a craft single-origin hot chocolate company, one I cannot wait to try myself. In this conversation, we get into why the best AI experiences won't come from hyped standalone products, but from deeply integrated suites with shared context. How Optimizely deploys usage credits and a learning-first mindset to price AI agents. Truths Alex figured out from more than a decade of M&A, and why buying someone's dream demands deep respect, not just integration. What he has learned from building a long-term healthy business under private equity, and the book he considers required reading for everyone at Optimizely. Let's dive in.
Alex, great to have you in our Second Acts podcast. Thank you. Really grateful for taking the time to speak with us.
Great to be on. Thank you.
Thank you, Alex. Alex, I want to start with the first things first, right? I couldn't but help ask this question. Can you tell us about the Wonderbon Chocolate Company? And has running a small craft-oriented business like Wonderbon influenced how you think about brand and customer intimacy at Optimizely scale?
Yes. So the question is, how much time do we have? But I tell you, I always believe that as a fan of chocolate and a lover of good chocolate, that the experience of hot chocolate wasn't as good as it could be. And so we created a product that's based on real melted chocolate rather than chocolate powder. So it tastes much richer, much deeper chocolate flavors than traditional hot chocolate that you get from powder. We started the business doing just before COVID. We had to pivot, we had to make changes, etc. But the one thing I really love about obviously doing a physical product is you see the reaction people have when they taste the product, when they experience it, which is so nice, to see that reaction. But you also learn a lot about, obviously how you connect with customers. And I think there's two lessons for me. One is that kind of like, how do you reach customers actually? How do you actually get your products promoted and recognized? And it takes a lot. And you think about all the different channels that our customers need to talk to when they think about their products and services. And I think the second part that you learn about is really that customer intimacy that you're speaking about, which is really recognizing your customers. We have some customers who like to drink a hot chocolate, in the afternoon, as a kind of little bit of a pick-me-up. You have other customers who might drink it in the evening after dinner, So there's different sort of behaviors, and how do you actually target the right people with the right message? And again, seeing their reaction and doing a really great job from a brand perspective. So you learn a lot, and it's been a really fun thing. I wish I was able to dedicate more time to it, but it definitely has influenced me.
Brilliant. It makes me wonder and think about something that we internally talk about a lot. In B2B, there's so much obsession about customers that we don't sometimes pay enough attention to the distinction between a customer account and a user. A user is a human, and we have to actually think about all these aspects that you're talking about. I think it's a beautiful connection that you're actually bringing out. That is an important reminder in the B2B world that we live in.
Yeah, Chris, you're so right. I always think that it's B2B is really, it needs to work on both levels. You do have an account relationship, but you need to delight the user. Yeah, and I notice this myself when I use tools. Switching from one to the other in some cases can be extremely painful. Yeah, and I think really understanding how your users adopt the solution and really caring for how much they love the solution, that's really, really important. And we are luckily as a company at Optimizely, I speak to many customers who started using Optimizely way before I was CEO of the company, and to some of them founders who used the product when they first started their companies. And it's so nice to see people's personal connection to your business. And I think that really, really matters. And I think we all have our favorite solutions, tools, etc. And it's very easy to forget this in a B2B environment. So I 100% agree with what you just said. It's a super important point.
Yeah. Thank you. That brings us to one question, that is, Optimizely as a company has come a long way, has evolved a lot. So for the benefit of our listeners, could you describe Optimizely? How do you describe Optimizely today versus when you joined?
Yeah, the company today, we are the leading digital experience platform in the market. We were recognized at the beginning of the year ahead of Adobe to provide the best digital DXP in the marketplace. But to describe it much differently, in my point of view, it starts off with, what is core to a digital experience. So we have a couple of key principles in the company. The first one is that we really believe content is at the heart of a digital experience, meaning Doesn't matter if it's a blog post you engage with or a paid ad or something else. Everything stems from really great content. And I think marketing teams should be creating great content. Digital teams should be testing content that works across different channels. And that could be a B2C or a B2B brand. Yeah. And then I think so that's one core concept that we have. And that's really content needs to be treated really like data or an asset that actually goes through an entire life cycle. And what we believe in, and that's the second core principle, is that technology has become very complex in MarTech with thousands of different solutions. And so our view is that you should be composing your MarTech stack, but you should really be thinking about what's the foundation of that stack. Yeah? And that's what we want optimized to be for our customers. And that's where, we have, over the last couple of years, really built out our platform so that people can create, publish, and optimize content within Optimizely. And then the last part is that it's all about, giving our users superpowers. In many ways, when you think about, for instance, the scientific method of testing, that's something that is really a superpower to understand your customer behaviors. And we want to make that superpower accessible to as many people as possible so that the marketing team is not reliant on the IT team to make a change to the website or to set up a test, or that the marketing team is not reliant on a data scientist to run a report and find out a piece of data. And so, this notion about giving a superpower to an employee or to a marketer is super, super important to us. So those are some of the key principles behind us. And, I'm obviously very biased, Krish, but I am very proud of what we have done as a company. And I really think that for many companies today that have invested in Optimizely, we deliver fantastic business outcomes.
Brilliant. And congratulations on the recognition as a leader.
Thank you.
So, you have said this particular topic about the importance of software suites. Right? I think the last time we spoke about this, you also spoke about the unbundling and bundling motions that continues to happen in the world of software. And so, I want to expand. I would like you to expand on that a little bit. Right? Why do you think that that holds true across enterprise software? That the suite always wins, and how the rise of AI especially is changing or reinforcing that idea.
Yeah, it's a great point, Chris. So let me just walk through it in a couple of steps. I think the first step is from a vendor perspective. When you actually create a company and you go into the market, there's a certain addressable market that you have. Yeah. And I think in order for companies to continue to grow in their business, you need to expand your addressable market over time. So from a vendor perspective, there's a very natural progression to start to address more markets as you grow your business. Yeah. And this is really the TAM argument from a vendor perspective. From a customer perspective, from a consumer of technology perspective, the notion is really around complexity and TCO. Yeah. And the complexity for me is like the signal, the noise to signal ratio is super high, meaning there's so many different vendors out there doing stuff. It is very, very difficult for a customer to really understand what do all these companies do differently. Yeah. And there's so much overlap. And how do you bring it together? And then from a cost perspective, what is the cost of integrating these solutions and making them work? And what ultimately happens is that a lot of companies have hundreds of different applications that they're all using to 10, 20, 30%, versus, really investing in a platform that gives you the data that you need. And that's why over time, companies, and especially the CIOs of companies, look to simplify the stack and actually be more holistic. And that's driven by cost, by data consistency. These are all things that aim to that. And then, the third argument now with AI coming in is really that the more context you have, the better your AI can be. Yeah. Now, suites have more context. Hence, suites can provide the best AI. Yeah. So that's kind of like the equation on that front. So, in my point of view, there's a very natural tendency for bundling of capabilities over time. But the important watch out, and I think the call out, is that it's not enough, obviously, to just bring solutions into one company. You do need to understand how they relate to each other, and you need to be thoughtful about how you do it, and you actually need to integrate them and then provide the consistent support, the consistent experience around it. So I'm not saying a suite is just a collection of acquired companies and one under one brand. It is really about thinking thoughtfully how do they connect with each other, and then investing in the integration of them so that your customer doesn't have to do the integration on their behalf. And that's been my lesson learned over the years across when I was at SAP early on, when I ran the Ariba business, when I ran Hybris, when I now run Optimizely. For me, it's always been about which assets actually make sense for a customer to use together. I give you a very simple example. We have a content marketing platform which also has a digital asset management system integrated in it. Why would you have a separate digital asset management capability when you already manage all your workflows and all your content in our solution? Those things go hand in hand together. And when we can integrate the DAM deeply into the workflows, it also makes sense for the user, and it's a better story for the customer, and they don't have to integrate two systems to each other. It just makes perfect sense. It's super logical. Yeah, those are the things that you need to see. There are other areas of the MarTech stack where I would say these are 2-3 levels removed from us. We wouldn't be good owners for those businesses and those solutions, and that's a different story. But so if the suite is thoughtfully put together, it, I think, serves both the vendor, the customer, and ultimately the technology progression.
Beautiful. And is there a fine line, would you say, that actually is there between the necessary breadth of that is needed for a suite and then the risk of mediocrity across too many features at some point? Like, how do you draw the line to say this should be the boundaries and not get too bloated?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I think it has a lot to do with thinking through the specific use cases, etc. And there's obviously companies, if you take Datadog, for instance, who has grown their portfolio by probably 40, 50 solutions and just keeps adding on, etc. Yeah. And so there's obviously benefits also, by the way, for a lot of customers just in the purchasing, the contractual side, all of that complexity as well. But what I think about when it comes to like not blurring the lines and thinking about where I really think that you do need to have the clear aspiration to provide best-in-class capabilities in the different areas that you cover. And there might be some scenarios where we say like, oh, this is good enough for a certain use case. But in general, I believe that you really need to have that ambition to say like, look, this is best-in-class technology. And so you should not have the trade-off as a customer to say like, hey, I'm taking a mediocre suite versus good best-in-class solutions. That should not be the trade-off. In fact, it should be the opposite, that you get more benefits from being on a full platform that has that. And I do think it does come down back to this notion of what makes logical sense to be connected to each other from both from the customer perspective and from the value that it delivers perspective to the customer. But I think that's a little bit where I think the line draws. It really is different by company and by example. And I, for instance, for our business, I constantly engage with customers, question myself, question our customers, do they get the value, where can we do better, where's the value of the solutions working together, and also defining your ICP around who is the ideal customer for that offering and that scenario. So it's hard to give a completely black and white answer. I do think it starts with constantly engaging with your customers and identifying the actual value that it delivers for them.
Sure. And when these suites are now expanding horizontally, right? Brian Balfour recently mentioned, right? Which is everyone now competes with everybody, right? With everyone else. And so, what are the modes to think about? What are the defensive modes that matter the most when it comes to these the horizontal expansion of products?
Yeah, I think when you think about the modes and when you think about where you differentiate, I think one is, you have a customer relationship, and so the first question is like, what is the customer relationship, the starting point of the customer relationship? So, and I think some companies just have a right to win or a right to expand more so than other companies because that's where they start the relationship. Yeah. Which is an important aspect. Like if a customer uses us for the content management, it's a very natural progression with them to start to talk to us about how they test on the content or what workflows they use for the content. Yeah. So I think that's one aspect. I think the other aspect is, again, it is about the quality of the individual solutions. Yeah, you can build a suite, but if your acquisitions and the expansions that you do lead to pretty mediocre products around your core, it's going to be hard, because then it's basically just becomes a financial play to get companies to adopt it, versus really delighting the users in those different functions. And then I think the third part is everything that we are talking about also really is important to think about the post-sales experience and the experience of actually the support, the integration of the solutions, the success, the adoption that you see. And so what you need to really get focused on as a company is how you actually measure your business and how you actually measure the success that your customers have on your platform. And I think where suites go wrong is to say like, look, I'm number one expanding with solutions that are pretty mediocre, and so I just buy random things and put them together. Two, I sell shelfware where I just try to push as much product to a customer as possible. And three, I don't really have the measurements in place to understand the adoption of our solutions and the value that they provide. So it's a hard journey. It's not an easy journey. And I think, what I always learned it probably takes a good 18 months to 24 months before you really understand the motion about how to actually help customers, because both internally, your team needs to learn the motion, and then you need to learn the motion with the customer. So it does take quite a bit of time. And I think a lot of times when I look at how companies get acquired or how companies merge together, especially in software, it happens all the time, obviously. Your business case hinges on cross-sell and growth from day one. But it does take quite a bit of time before you actually get to that moment. Yeah. And so I think again, it's a challenging journey. It can absolutely be done, and I do think it's a real viable strategy for companies. And I do think companies that are platforms will win. I think in our space, for instance, despite the fact that there are 18,000 MarTech solution and hundreds of solutions in like the content space, I believe there's going to be 3-4 big platforms over time. And I think with AI, the same will happen because there's just too many individual companies that don't have enough TAM and that ultimately will not be sustainable over the long term. So I think the unbundling happens when new innovation comes in, and then the bundling happens. And again, I think the companies that will win are the ones who really are thoughtful about putting their portfolio together, making it all about being best in class, and helping companies adopt the full portfolio rather than being motivated by just pushing product.
Beautiful. And I would love to pick your brain on one particular thing, right? As scale founders, many of us actually struggle with one thing, which is building that product is actually the easier part. The hardest part is actually getting that activated, one to be able to sell, and then be able to actually make the customer successful in every one of those products, and also making the choice in the pricing decisions, the incentive decisions around it inside the organization has so much friction, right? I would love to hear specifically around pricing. Are there particular where are the pricing hardest challenges for you when it comes to how does to scale across product lines? Where have you had the challenges when it comes to pricing the product, especially when you have a suite-based pricing? Would love to hear any learnings related to it, especially if there are new learnings with respect to the AI inside the suites. Would love to hear that as well.
Yeah, that's another great topic, and I wish I had always the crystal ball on all those topics. But you honestly keep on learning, and you keep on getting better. The one thing that I always come back to is you do need to really think about what is the objective or what's really the goal that you set. Yeah. And I think you need to be, in order of any pricing strategy, needs to start with what are you truly trying to accomplish. I mean, did you just buy a company to again just try to accelerate revenue, or did you try to actually make your existing product more sticky? Did you try to actually drive more adoption for something? There could be different reasons for what you're doing in order to actually drive this. And I think as you have a suite, you actually have now a lot more options about what you can actually do. You actually have more pricing options. Yeah. And you need to start to understand again what you price for in terms of what you actually your goal is. Now, in for instance the case of AI, I would say right now the pricing discussion should be much more adoption focused than revenue focused. Yeah, meaning let's get people really to adopt an AI capability, and then over time you can revisit how do we monetize it, etc., as value is being created on the customer side. And I think that's, in some ways, I think that's the right logic. Yeah, but create value, then ensure that you monetize it. Yeah, so I think that's an approach. When it comes to the suite itself, I do think that I, as a customer, would always have the expectation that if I buy 2 or 3 solutions from you, I expect that I get a benefit from buying 2 or 3 solutions from you rather than just one solution. Yeah. And I think that's logical. And so I try to put myself into the customer's shoes when it comes to defining pricing decisions. Yeah. And then it needs to be based on a logical model that you can actually defend and well deal with. If the customer feels like everything becomes a transaction, then it becomes a very strained relationship. Versus if you try to say, like, look, we actually try to make it easier for you to consume more products from us. And obviously, when you get really then to a full strategic enterprise sales cycle, then it becomes a conversation about, more like an all-you-can-eat model, more of a strategic enterprise pricing approach that actually allows you to really look at the consumption and the growth of the relationship. So I think as going from scale to going, as you scale up, and if you think about multiple solutions, I think the lesson learned for me is, number one, really start with what's the objective that's driving your pricing decision. And number two, put yourself into the customer's shoes and what you would expect to get out of this. And number three, think about the time horizon that you have in terms of some of the incentives that you want to put in place. But one thing that, for instance, for me is very important is that we retain and grow our customers. But retention is a critical part of that, and that requires delivering, again, value. And if you make an acquisition that's very much based on product acceleration, then I think you need to price it in such a way that a customer gets access to this product acceleration, because it will make you stickier. And that means, you can make the price more affordable for the customer to get that feature. Yeah.
Beautiful. I love the way you are framing it, but the most important one that I am also hearing you, as you say it, is you are actually articulating it in a way that the mindset is to think of this as a reversible decision where you can continue to personalize the pricing and packaging at a customer level, right? And don't try to come up with a one-size-fits-all solution as if this is the one time in which you are going to have to maximize anything, right? Instead, and not look at it as a transaction, but actually continuous value delivery and value capture as a fair value exchange over time, right? And that comes through in all the principles that you are saying. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Switching topics. I want to touch upon something that you said about the unsexy stuff, which
Hmm.
is you said that enterprise AI is mostly about the unsexy stuff.
Hmm.
What are some of the under discussed challenges of making AI work at scale in that world? And can you also walk us through the 5 pillars of execution ready AI that you talk about?
Yeah. So when I think about the unsexy stuff and where this really comes from, Krish, is this notion of when you look at what most companies talk about, especially when generative AI first came about, it's like, okay, I can create a blog post, I can create an image. That's obviously what a lot of companies see initially, and then it's sexy, and you're like, wow, this is great, which is all good. But actually, when you actually go one level deeper, what you really find is where AI hopefully helps all of us is to actually take care of a lot of the menial tasks, the processes that slow companies down, the workflows that every big enterprise deals with, but can actually move much faster on. And what I've found is that in a lot of our customer conversations, the customer really is starting to gravitate towards, help me figure out how I can become more productive, more efficient, but also mitigate risks in my business. Yeah, because I have so many things that are process related. Yeah, that I want to solve for, and I really appreciate that. Really dawned on me that that's really where the initial value of AI really comes in, because there's still a certain creative aspect that comes with a blog post, etc. And I think you find so many different models now that can create a piece of written content, for instance, and companies are getting bombarded with different tools that do that. Yeah. But the really interesting part is to say, like, look, let's talk about the engine room. Let's talk about how information actually flows through it. So imagine you actually put something together, and it then goes to approval with your legal team. It goes to approval with your manager. It goes ultimately, before it gets published, for instance, to a certain channel. Those steps all typically require X number of days, hours, etc. to get done. How can you actually either completely automate them or make them move much faster? And that's something that I am very, very excited for, in terms of bringing that capability and that value to our customers through agentic AI. And that's where I think the value cases for companies are really expressed, etc. And this is where I think we go away from the hype, but we go really into from a hype to real business outcomes. And I think that really needs to happen, Krish, relative to the business outcomes that companies really want to get from AI. And what we are doing as a company is, and you mentioned like the 5 models of execution for an AI strategy. What we try to do with our customers and with the market is, really be advisors to our customers. Yeah, because there is so much noise out there. There are so many different companies. And the question I get from customers today, Krish, is like, explain to me the swim lanes of where does an agent force sit? Where does an agent space sit? Where does this solution sit? And where do you sit as a company? And I think every technology company today, if you run a technology company, and I do this for Optimizely, I tell my team, we need to be very clear about where we play and where we don't play and where we connect with somebody else. Because just with software, it's the same thing. Yeah. The only thing is, AI companies are now so much easier to start even than it before at software companies. So in some ways, you find so many more. And so the noise ratio is so much louder. And this is why I think it's so important that you are able to articulate where to start and where your swim lanes are. And then obviously you need to be able to articulate to people about how to actually see the differentiation in tools relative to the data, the instruction, the toolings, that the context that every solution has. But anyways, I think the short of it, or the most important message for me is, um, be specific about the swim lanes that you occupy from an AI perspective. And I think the one swim lane we can really help companies with in their content workflows is really that unsexy stuff, which is, I think, very, very valuable for companies.
Right. Thank you. One more question related to pricing. Right. From what I gather and understood about Opal, Optimizely's AI layer, it spans much of the suite and it's priced on a usage-based credits model. And this transition that you're going through is actually very hard, especially for an established product. And I'm curious to know some of the pricing lessons that have emerged as your customers move from experimentation to scaled AI usage. What are some early lessons that are coming through in your organization?
Yeah, so Opal AI, thank you for mentioning. So Opal is our AI. Opal is like the gemstone. You look at it from different sides, it can do different things. And Opal goes across our entire suite of solutions. So it actually learns from all aspects of our solutions. And but the engineering team and the product team did an incredible job being very, very thoughtful about how they actually built Opal from the instructions that you can give to the agents, from the context that it has, to the tools that it can use. And so we really see it as an orchestration platform for all of marketing, which is super exciting. We found that there are basically differences between, let's say, I would say, very repeatable use cases. Let's say, for instance, you run a test. You can have an ideation agent, an agent that implements the test for you, builds the code behind it, and then an analysis agent. No, that's one very clearly identified agents. Then you could have very specialized agents. Yeah. And what we found is that depending on the use cases, that customers obviously then also have a different pattern of adopting it. Some customers, you need to spend much more time with them to define their agents and then launch them. Other customers who already use your product for certain cases, they already start using, agents out of the box directly. And so the pattern of consumption is different. And what we chose to do is we basically decided to test it, because we are kind of a testing company. So we thought we should test it. So we gave customers credits to consume and see what patterns emerge in terms of how companies actually start using our solution. Because ultimately, as I said before, our pricing strategy is all about adoption. Because for me, I did not want to make price the issue of why somebody wouldn't adopt our AI. I want, us to first learn how people use the solution. And then, once we identified some of the patterns, then we can talk to a customer about, like, look, this is how many credits you consume for the following tasks. You're doing these many tasks. This is kind of like how many credits you will need for the full year. And this is the cost for them. And this is the value that you deliver. That's the conversation you then get in. But what I noticed is, one, customers don't want to obviously be facing an uncertain future in terms of how expensive is this going to be for me. Customers do want to have a good articulation of what value is this driving for me in the future. I'm not going to just do this because it's AI. I need you to point out the value to me. And then customers, once again, the consumption model, the value that it drives, I think then customers are very willing to say, like, look, this is something I'm going to invest into. Yeah. But that's kind of been the learning for us in the last couple of months. But I think the important part is, you as a technology provider, I think you really need to have that test and learn mentality, rather than saying, like, to your previous point, Krish, you can't come out with a model that you say, like, hey, we're not going to change it. You need to continue to evolve it based on the feedback that you're getting. Yeah.
Beautiful. And what you actually have shared is a very good way to also think about it tactically in terms of driving adoption, understanding through the customer's lens before actually coming up with a pricing hypothesis, rather than throwing a price and seeing if it sticks in the market. Right? It's
Yes.
it's a very good way to actually test, iterate, and learn from the customers and with the customers.
Yeah.
Beautiful. Thank you. So one of the topics I'm very excited about to want to learn from you is about M&A, right? And you have worked on some major deals, right, including Ariba, Qualtrics, and all of that. So I'm curious about this one thing, which is you have led major deals at SAP, and you also steered several more at Optimizely as you scale the business beyond. May I say the ARR? Is it something that you have disclosed?
Yeah, we are over 400. We are over 400 million now. Yes,
north of 400 million, right?
Yeah.
Thank you. So, what's the consistent framework you come back to when deciding whether to acquire, and what integration principles do you rely on to make M&A-driven second acts actually work?
Yeah, I have a lot of thoughts on this topic, and it's something that I'm very passionate about. You see, for me, it's these are very strategic moments, obviously, for a business, and I think you need to have personally as a CEO an extremely strong resolve around why you do this. One thing that I do, Krish, is in all the cases, I really go into myself and try to write down on a blank piece of paper the real motivation for doing this. Yeah. And I really think it takes a while to really get it really sharp, but ultimately it's your name attached to these moves. Yeah. And for me, there's aspects of it that are pretty cut and dry, obviously, where you talk about, what's the objective? Is it to accelerate your product roadmap? Is it to the cross-sell opportunity? Is it to acquire talent, etc.? But there's also a very personal aspect of acquisitions, which is the companies you acquire, the team, the people, the founders, and I've had some very good experiences acquiring companies that had incredible founders, and I'm extremely proud of the fact that, for instance, at Optimize, after 6 acquisitions, all the founders are still somehow engaged with our business. One of them is, the president of our company, for instance, and that's something that's really important for me. So, because you are basically buying somebody else's dream, you are buying somebody else's, that's big. That's very meaningful. And I think you really need to have conviction about why you are doing this. And you need to understand how you're going to continue that dream, or are you going to change the dream, that you're acquiring, and what are you putting behind it to make it successful going forward. Yeah. And I really think that's an important decision. And I think too many times you read all the statistics about how much M&A fails. And I think it really comes down from the fact that people on a piece of paper they don't do some of the hard thinking of why that is really required. Yeah. They don't think enough about what will it take afterwards to make it really successful. And they don't respect the dream enough of the founders who created these businesses in the first place. And I think that's what you really need to pay attention to. Yeah. And if you do that well, you can have an incredible, successful M&A strategy going forward. That's what I really think about. Yeah.
You made it sound very simple, but it's amazing. Thank you. Right. Yeah. I have only done, mostly we have only done small acquisitions, right, to accelerate the product. These are very valuable lessons. Thank you for sharing that. 5 minutes, last 5 minutes to ask a couple of quick questions. But the one thing I definitely would like to understand is you talk about long-term healthy business under private equity. And especially, right, I think this question is all the more important because a lot of companies that are established and have scaled previously, the pre-AI SaaS companies, are also thinking about the capital structures and how to actually operate. And as someone who has actually scaled the company under Insight as the more as a growth private equity, you've talked about how it has enabled you to build long-term healthy business. And today, a lot of businesses, including Squarespace and others, have also gone into private ownership to go through a transformation. And that is happening in front of us. So would love to hear your thoughts on what does it really mean in practice especially now when everyone is pouring money into AI and the definition of disciplined growth feels like it's shifting again. How do you think about long-term healthy company and this relationship with growth capital and ownership under private equity?
Yes, I think a lot about uh, that ultimately running a company and being motivated by building something of value uh, is kind of for me at the core of everything I personally do. And I found that Insight in particular as an investor in our business has absolutely shared that philosophy of saying like, as long as we build a good business, good things will happen to this company. Yeah. And so what I think is where companies go wrong is when they become financial vehicles with short-term mindsets rather than trying to say like, look, we're actually building value here for companies. You spoke before about the value exchange. If the value exchange is right with a customer, your business is going to grow, you're going to create value, you're going to be paid for that value. And for me, it was important that whatever investor there is, that the investor shares that mindset and has the same motivation. Now, I'm a manager or a leader that cares for building something. Yeah. There could be other people who just care for like, look, I want to be able to just have a very good financial outcome. Different people are motivated by different things, and I think it's important to find the right match between them. But for me, it was always important to think about um, really thinking about, is the capital that you are raising or the capital that is invested in your business sharing your philosophy about how to actually create a business of value in the future. And again, I think always for me it was always anchoring it about the value we provide to a customer, making the right decision for the right reasons. Not making short-term decisions because you just believe like, okay, in the short term that will help us accelerate value, but actually in the long term it's the wrong decision for the customer. Obviously, that's easier said than done, but once you have the same principles, you can always come back and rely on those principles together. And with Insight Partners, for instance, I went through COVID, I went through an interest rate change environment. We are now going through AI. I mean, there were so many changes, and it's so important that in those moments you actually have kind of like the same frame of reference when you make decisions. That I think really is important in those moments. So I think sometimes venture, private equity, public companies, all of them have their specific reputations and their specific ways of working. But I do think it really is important for me as a CEO, but to find again the capital that's aligned to my beliefs and my philosophy, which is do the right thing, build a good company, good things will ultimately follow.
Beautiful, beautiful. I think full disclosure, I forgot to mention, Insight Partners is also an investor at Chargebee, and no, definitely not a sponsored, but right, it's amazing to actually hear you talk about your experience. It's fantastic. I think the one thing that clearly stands out for me is the decision process around the mindset and the dialogue that needs to happen. You are actually articulating everything as a steward of the business, which is the journey of the product with respect to the customer is something that is forever, right? The cap table structures can change, liquidity events can actually happen along the way, but do we have the right partner who actually shares that vision, right? For us to actually be the steward of the business, build the right product for the right customers, and can continue the journey and the dream, I think is what comes through, right?
Yeah.
And right now, a lot of us actually go through a transformation as well, right? In terms of pricing model, product, and increased competition. So it's actually going to be a very interesting phase for a lot of founders.
The one thing I would still add to all of it is, I think the one thing that for me private equity actually taught me a little bit was, in some ways it's nearly like taking an MBA program in some ways, and focuses you on not like really focuses you on thinking harder about certain decisions and not just taking the easy route out in some ways. Yeah. Which I think is actually very healthy. Yep. And you notice that what can you achieve? Like a private equity obviously looks at profitability, for instance, of a company. Yeah. Whereas venture might not be that focused on it at a certain stage of a company. And I think you do need to learn those skill sets if you want to be a successful operator. And private equity helps you think through these decisions. And I think that's actually really good training for anyone, because it's sometimes very easy to say like, hey, we just need, can you solve X, Y, and Z differently? Yeah. And I thought that was always very helpful in the private equity model.
Thank you. And you've been very generous with your time and between customer calls to actually take the conversation with us. Thank you. One last question, if I may, very quick one. Is there a book that made you change something in either Optimizely's core business or the way you operate as a CEO this year?
Yeah, I'm a big reader. I love books. I read a lot. One of the books that we actually have our employees read is a book called Team of Teams, which is a book by General McChrystal, and it talks about how it's while the context is military in the book, it really is a book about leadership, and it really is about this notion about how do you create a shared consciousness in your organization. And I think as you grow and as you have more departments and more people and more silos in some ways, it even becomes more important about getting everybody on the same page. And it's a wonderful book that describes how the military did that during the time in Iraq, etc. And it's really fascinating what General McChrystal has done. So I recommend that book oftentimes to people. So Team of Teams. Yeah.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for your time. Really enjoy the conversation. Thank you so much, Alex.
It was awesome. Thank you.